G'day mate, 40 here. So I saw that Colin Liddell profiled the prolific blogger Z-Man, who pretty much churns out a new column every day. Like, how does he do it? Now, I haven't followed Z-Man very much the last 4 years because I find his columns are just a series of assertions about reality. So unlike a Steve Saylor who tries to argue from data, Z-Man just piles on a lot of assertions, so I don't feel value there. Like anyone can assert anything. There's no there's no payoff for me as a reader. But he does very effectively feed an audience. So I didn't realize he'd been doxxed by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Apparently he's a software salesman. But I just checked out his blog. Started off going on Colin Liddell's website, Neocrat, and seeing who's who in the alt-right Z-Man profile. Then I read the Southern Poverty Law Center docs from February of this year. Then I went to Z-Man's blog, and so he's still churning out the columns every day. So it doesn't sound necessarily like he's been fired or that his life's been devastated, and didn't detect any change in his tone. So he doesn't seem beaten down, right? He's become a celebrity on the alt-right, and he feeds his audience, right? They like what he says. He apparently makes approximately $50,000 a year in donations, which is pretty good. And he does that by effectively, giving the audience, the certainty that they want. That the world essentially is fixed against them. So I first, what is the Mandela effect? I've forgotten. Wasn't he doxxed before? I don't know. But what's the Mandela effect? But he started off as a race realist. Now it seems like he's gotten lost in conspiracy theories. Now, the Southern Poverty Law Center takedown was very careful. I mean, they really marshaled their data. And so the Southern Poverty Law Center is a professional organization with tens of millions of dollars in assets, and when they go after someone, they do it with great care. But let's have a look at the Colin Liddell profile on Neocrat. And so that's why I was saying, like, why would anyone choose an avatar like this? So it is a very curious avatar for Z-Man. Like, why does he choose an avatar the selling of a young boy? Right? What the hell's going on there? So once anonymous blogger who was outed in February 2022 as John Christopher Zander, 55, software salesman residing in suburbs of Baltimore. His identity became known, ironically, due to a data breach at a domain registrar and web host Epic, which was a service that he strongly recommended. So I remember Z-Man posting comments in Steve Saylor section 2014 or so. And then he turned into a blogger, race realist around 2015, kind of a paleo-conservative type. And he's written for Takis magazine. He may be of partial Italian-American background, says Colin. He overreacted to an article that cast aspersions on Italian valor in World War II. So it's funny, he's presents himself as a data guy, but very emotional. Like, he reacts very emotionally to things. So he started his Z-Man blog in 2013 after a history on comment sections and message boards. So he started out as fairly sane and nuanced on the JQ, other racial issues, but he allowed himself to become associated with actual Nazis by writing for Countercurrents. There's a strong streak of boomer fatalism and conspiracy theories. Now, why is his chosen avatar from homoerotic artwork by the German artist Ludwig Diesch? Shows the German barbarian Alaric the Visigoth being offered a small male child. Right? What's going on here? Like, why would he choose an avatar of this Visigoth being offered a small male child by a dark-haired man for unknown reasons. Like, what the hell is the payoff? Like, why would anyone choose that as their avatar? That is a bit weird. So, Southern Poverty Law Center, prolific white nationalist personality identified. So yeah, I do remember him as fairly nuanced back, 2013, 2014, 2015. And then as he became more successful, he became increasingly captured by his audience and increasingly fatalistic and into conspiracy theories. So the Z-Man's a white nationalist internet personality, pulls in thousands of dollars per month churning out racist propaganda, rubs shoulders with white nationalists at conferences on both sides of the Atlantic without ever showing his face. But based on research and analysis, Hate Watch believes it has identified the person behind the pseudonym. So Z-Man gets a ton of traffic. Like, how does he do this? Because it's not with the careful data analysis of a Steve Saylor. It's with fairly emotional columns where he makes a series of assertions about the world and how it's headed to hell, and there are dark, sinister forces arrayed against us. Like, why is this so successful? And I think a good answer for this can be found in Decoding the Gurus, the latest podcast. Says interview with Manveer Singh on gurus and shamans.
Yeah, so we could break it down at a couple levels. Most generally, the argument was that shamanism reliably develops in human societies everywhere because it is just an incredibly compelling means of controlling uncertainty. And I can break that down a little, but the idea is essentially people want control over the uncertain in their lives.
Yeah, so that's what makes pundits successful, right? As opposed to being right or wise or true or good. What makes them successful is that they give people assurance, just like successful clergy give people assurance. Like a successful Christian clergy gives people assurance of their salvation. Like a successful Jewish clergy gives people assurance about the greatness of being Jewish. People want assurance in this atomized, uncertain world. So whether it's gurus, religious figures, bloggers, YouTubers, pundits, politicians, right? People are looking for assurance, and there's an enormous market for people who can sound fully assured. So I often get comments, how do you react to Z-Man's latest column where he's very, confidently pronouncing on this conspiracy theory or that conspiracy theory, and I throw out my hands and say, I don't know how to respond to it. It's just, a series of unprovable assertions, without any evidence given for them. Like, how do you react to that? Well, he has a substantial audience. People react, to the emotional assurance that he gives them, essentially that the world is biased against them, that dark, sinister forces have conspired to rig the world against them, and so therefore they're not responsible for their own misery. And there's an enormous audience for this, and for shamans and the like.
Both informationally, so we want information about all of this stuff, and then we also want outcomes to happen in a...
Yeah, information. So people who are verbally fluent, right? People who have strong rhetorical gifts that can master an enormous audience. Now, there's absolutely no connection between the gracefulness with which you speak or write. There's no connection between your rhetorical firepower and you being right or true or good. There's just no connection between these things. But if you sound assured, people feel assured. Like if you sound confident, people feel confident. Like people take strength from your rhetorical firepower and your rhetorical fluency, and that makes for success. But there's absolutely no connection between that and being right. So, I'm trying to think of this Fox Sports personality, Colin Coward. He talked in a 2015 interview, I think, with The Ringer. He said, "There's no money in being right, right? when he gives his strong opinions on sports, his success has absolutely nothing to do with being right. Right? The money is in being interesting. So with punditry, the money is in being interesting and in offering assurance and sounding like you know what you're talking about, even though you may not.
In our favor. And that creates these kinds of markets of magic. Specialists are competing to provide the most compelling services, the most compelling means of controlling uncertainty, and that drives the evolution.
Yeah, that's a good description of YouTuber pundits. All right, we're competing in a narrow market to provide people with assurance in an incredibly complicated, atomized, ever-changing world where there's no basis in fact for many of the assurances that we're doling out. So if you go to JFGRP, you get a reliable alt-right libertarian perspective on life, and he sounds very convincing. Richard Spencer, whatever position he's taking, he always sounds very convincing, right? So these are shamans of assurance and comfort and excitement.
Evolution of this incredibly psychologically compelling cluster of practices to essentially convince clients that this individual can provide them with exactly what they need. And I can go a bit into more like what those techniques are, but that's the general perspective on shamanism.
And so also with influencers, right? They're here to provide you with something you need because these are extraordinary individuals. And one of the ways that people show how extraordinary they are is by intermittent fasting, right? So people who do things that you don't want to do, feel like you can't do, like workouts, intermittent fasting, bathing in cold water for 15 minutes every morning, right? So walking 10 miles a day, or lifting huge amounts of weight, right? If you want to put yourself out there as a pundit and a YouTuber, right, who's making a strong emotional connection with people and meeting their emotional needs for assurance, then really helps to portray yourself as having an extraordinary story and extraordinary gifts and superhuman abilities, such as intermittent fasting, lifting extraordinary amounts of weight, extraordinary workouts, extraordinary mental workouts, physical workouts, right? You need to show that you're not the average Joe, right? You've got something special. And then people get comfort that they're connected to someone with something special.
So in that framework, that compelling cluster of features, cognitively compelling and socially compelling cluster of features.
Right, so what is cognitively, socially, psychologically compelling? All right, verbal fluency, rhetorical power, a sense of confidence, assurance, strength that just shines out through the words. Someone who comes across as seeing things clearly, and someone who's going to assure you of what you need assurance on, someone who's going to divine what's going on in this confusing world, kind of break it down in a way that you can understand and that feels good and helps you feel more prepared and stronger, better able to struggle with the challenges that life puts before all of us.
What are they? What are the key ones?
Yeah, so the thing that I argue in that piece, in which I really focus on that piece, in which I use as a perspective on all of these, is different practices that make an individual seem different from normal humanity, and in so doing make it seem more plausible or more
right. So if you want to be an influencer or a pundit, it helps to, or a preacher, set yourself out from ordinary humanity, right? Extraordinary workouts, intermittent fasting, you read a book a day, you speak 5 languages, right? Anything you can do that sets yourself out from the rest of humanity, that makes you more worthy, more likely to receive adoration and develop a following.
more tenable, that they have special powers. So in something that I'm writing right now.
Right, so do you believe that someone's got special powers? Well, if they can do extraordinarily long fasts that you can't do, if they can do workouts that you can't do, if they do mental challenges that you can't do, if they have gifts with language, with learning, with degrees, with accomplishments, all sorts of things that you can't, then you might get more emotional assurance that this is an extraordinary person with extraordinary powers, and that you will get a little taste of that extraordinariness by listening to them, connecting with them, right? You know, vicariously, you can become more than what you are just by connecting with them.
Now I'm thinking about these all as I'm trying to coin this word, or I was like, there needs to be a word for this process, and I've been thinking about this word xenize, which comes from like xenos meaning foreign or other, and it's like using all of these techniques to look like you are fundamentally different from normal humanity. So you observe a lot of deprivation. You have these dramatic initiations.
Right. So the YouTube pundit, man, he's someone who's different from the other YouTubers, right? This is someone with special gifts, special rhetorical gifts, mental gifts, psychological gifts, social proof. You know, he can do workouts that you can't do. He's gone to universities that you haven't attended. He's, you know, made amounts of money that, you know, you'll never be able to make. Like he's, you know, trekked in the Himalayas. He's walked to the Antarctica. All right, so you have to set yourself apart if you want to develop a following. He's converted to Orthodox Judaism.
Where you claim that, you know, your skeleton has been reconstructed. You talk about like dying and coming back to life, about having your body parts replaced with new body parts. All of these are about a practitioner undergoing some kind of fundamental transformation, about like drifting away from normal humanity, and that makes it more plausible, more compelling, more tenable that they can do things that normal humans cannot. And so related to that is trance. You know, this thing that really defines shamanism is that they enter what seem to be these non-ordinary states. And some people will argue that, oh, the non-ordinary states, the trance of shamanism is all about what trance psychologically does, you know.
And the compelling YouTuber, right? They enter a different state. They're on. They're alive. They're captivating. They're compelling, right? The YouTuber, the shaman, preacher man, the salesman.
But creates greater insight. It allows you to be a better problem solving, whatever. What I'm arguing is that, yes, trance might have these effects, but the reason that trance so often occurs is it's kind of this performance of otherness. It's this individual who is experiencing, who is looking nothing like what a normal human does.
Right. So it's the performance of otherness, right? That's key part to becoming a successful pundit, right? You want to show that you're other, that you're different, that you have accomplishments that other people don't have. You've had experiences that other people don't have, that you have physical, rhetorical, moral, spiritual, psychological, social skills that other people don't have, right? Who wants to, you know, watch someone like them? And people want to watch someone who's other, you know, someone who's different, you know, someone who's extraordinary. You get extraordinary through your connection with them.
And that makes it more compelling, more credible that they are doing something that normal humans cannot do. Is that all clear?
Yeah, very clear. And there's kind of two immediate parallels that like crop up to me. The obvious one related to the show that you're currently on is that we find similar sorts of narratives, obviously without the magical elements, usually depends whether Jordan Peterson is talking or not, but in the narratives of the gurus that we look at, where they often have these stories about in how childhood they were recognized as, you know, special, and in many cases it's actually presented as that they were seen to have learning difficulties or some problem, but this was later recognized as a unique way of approaching the world. So that seems to parallel, in maybe in a less dramatic, less supernatural way, the kind of narrative that you're describing shamans to go through, and that makes me, you know, it's a very appealing image, like as the gurus of the modern secular instantiation of shamans, but we can talk about that idea. But the other one, which I'm just curious to get your thoughts on first, is, so like superhero narratives and in popular media or like, you know, anime characters in Japan, they often are represented in the same way, having these special powers and transformational experiences, and you find those in lots of myths and legends. So is the argument that that is a cognitive attractor that applies broadly across all these contexts, but there's additional elements that make it flow into the shamanism stream? Or is that like slightly different when you're talking about, you know, kind of fictional figures who you can't probably directly interact with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess we can start with the second one. The parallel you're drawing with superheroes, I think, is a great one, and that's like one that I often think about, where I think that really demonstrates this logic, where the storyteller, the narrator, the writer needs to convince you, at least in this world that they're building, that this person can shoot lasers out of their eyes, that they can be incredibly fast, that, you know, they can be a fighter or whatever, that they can do things that like the average person cannot. And
okay, let's have a look here at the Mandela effect. Widespread false memory that Nelson Mandela actually died in prison in the 1980s. Okay, false memory. Okay, is the Mandela effect a false memory? Did you hear that Yi met with Trump and they argued? No, I haven't heard that. All right, so apparently Kanye West, Nick Fuentes, and Milo is jumping on board. So Kanye met with Trump, and Trump's not going to sign on board with anything publicly, critically anti-Jewish. Oh, the Mandela effect is garbage, just shows how checked out people are. Okay. All right. This is from Decoding the Gurus. Oh, so Kanye just posted a debrief on his meetings with Trump on his Twitter. So what's extraordinary about Trump's new run for president is how professional his team is. And so they seem to have shifted him away from complaining about the 2020 election. They seem an incredibly professional group, highly accomplished. Is Trump going to have the discipline to stick with an election team that knows what they're doing and with a track record of success? Or is he going to bring in a bunch of losers like Rudy Giuliani and the clown show his clown show lawyers who are protesting the 2020 election, right? So is Trump going to be strong enough to keep ties with professionals, or is he going to bring in losers who simply flatter his ego? So right now, it looks like Trump is running a professional campaign. Do I think Trump has a chance? Yes, absolutely. I think Trump has at least a 50% chance of winning the Republican nomination, and then a 50% chance of winning the general election. So right now, Trump's team, his political team, is highly professional, highly skilled, with a winning track record. Yeah, Bibi Netanyahu was given a very solid mandate in Israel. He's mounted a very significant political comeback. I don't think Israel is clearly in the bag for DeSantis, right? Israel will go with whoever the winner's going to be. So yeah, Bibi's got a mandate in that he's able to form a government that has a coherent ideology. So the interregnum, the Israeli coalition that excluded Bibi, had no ideological coherence. Now, Bibi Netanyahu is able to form a government that is ideologically coherent, that's all on the right wing. He doesn't have much of a margin, just a couple of seats above what the minimum necessary, but at least it's a coherent coalition. And so, yeah, he's got a right-wing mandate because everyone is on board. Everyone is right-wing, is very strong for protecting Israel, going after Israel's best interests, even if it doesn't necessarily look good. And what do we have here? Boy, you're not afraid, are you? These birds aren't very afraid, man. Not as intimidating as I used to be.
And what's really fundamental to that is explaining why they can do this and other people cannot. Like, how have they been essentially transformed to facilitate that? And that seems to explain or contribute to the fact that superhero stories are incredibly diverse. But one of the few things that all of them seem to share is an origin story. It's something that tells you why this person is other, why they deviate from humanity. I've actually lately been reading a lot into a superhero origin story, so it's good that you brought this up. And one thing that I really like about them, and that I think provides an interesting parallel for shamanism.
I have never been able to keep my attention on any superhero story. Like, they just seem like comics to me. I've never had any interest in comics. So, yeah, I plan to come back to LA. I'll be back in LA in late January, but I'm hanging out in Australia for 3 months. But I've never had any interest in superheroes or in comics. So all of my friends would, read comics, and it just seems so silly and trivial, and I can't maintain any enthusiasm, any interest in any superhero story. They're just, I don't know, it's just so aggressively low IQ. I can't be bothered to try to read deeper, greater themes into superhero stories. It's just never, ever, 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 ever appealed to me. And then when they call comics graphic novels, I can't seriously, I can't call a comic a graphic novel. Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about Watchmen, but I may just have a mental block. I just can't, it's just not my thing. I tried watching The Watchmen, the movie, the TV series, I just can't do it. It's just not my thing.
Is that they really seem to reflect people's conception of what constitutes essential transformation. So, if we go from the 1940s to now, we see that origin stories change over time. First, it's a lot about nuclear stuff, and then at points it's about magical stuff. Now it's really about like bioengineering, genetic mutants. As our conceptions of like a fundamental transformation changes, so do the stories to convince us, or to at least tell us that these individuals are different. To your broader question about like,
yeah, I tried to watch the new Watchmen series, centered around the Tulsa history, but it was such a dramatic distortion of Tulsa history, what happened in Tulsa. I lasted, I think, 1.5 episodes. I really, truly tried to make it a go. And I love Fargo. Like, I love the movie and I love the TV series, but the latest series, the latest season with Chris Rock, again, I couldn't even make it through the first episode of that season. It was just so absurdly anti-white. It's good to watch like 1920s Soviet propaganda. Yeah, but you have to be in a particular mood. All right. So, when you're in the mood for that kind of masochism, then's the time.
how should we think about the relationship between superheroes and shaman, or of all of these narratives, these fictional narratives? So I think what's going on across them is they're reflecting this more general intuition that if a person claims to do things that normal people cannot, if they essentially like violate our concept of what a human is capable of, they have to be a different kind of entity. They have to be
right. Think Tony Robbins, or a lot of gurus or influencers. Right, they claim to do things that ordinary people can't, like incredible feats of fasting, physical endurance, moral achievement, social, economic. Right, it's like, here, you can believe me, you can trust me, you can have faith in me because I can do these incredible things that normal people can't do.
Be conceptually different. In superhero stories, that deviation is used towards the narrative or the function of exploring like what someone could do if they have special powers
And my father was like this. He was a preacher man, and he would try to exude being this other, right? Someone who was outside the realm of the normal human. He was more disciplined. He read more. He exercised more. He was more careful with his diet, with his health. He was more moral. Right? He wasn't just another flesh and blood human being, deeply flawed like the rest of us. No, he had to be extraordinary to try to reach the extraordinary heights of being a preacher man.
Thinking about the entertainment or whatever. In shamanism, this intuition is leveraged to create the experience, to create the perception that this individual can provide a service. Shamanism is a service.
So what makes for a compelling live stream? So part of it is just pure entertainment value. Part of it is informational value. And then the third key component is the spectacle. Like something, extraordinary happens that just compels your attention. And so this is also what the great salespeople do. Yeah, he's talking about shamanism, shamans. This is what the great salespeople do, the great YouTube live streamers do, the great preachers do, right? They create an extraordinary experience. Yeah, guests are important, absolutely.
In many instances, and I think some people are resistant to this idea, but shamanism is overwhelmingly a service-oriented profession in a way, and so...
Yeah, so being... Yeah, your great look. Any solo shows how to carry. Absolutely, guests make things much more interesting. So being a pundit, or being a YouTuber, or being a preacher or a congregational rabbi, you are in the service industry, right? If you're going to be successful, it's because you serve your audience, right? And you serve your audience by providing them assurance where they want assurance in a complicated, confusing, dislocated, atomized world, and where you provide distraction and you tell them what feels good to them, what they want to hear, either that the world is biased against them or the world is not biased against them, that they can achieve extraordinary things, or they're the shadowy cabal who's running everything, so you shouldn't feel bad about being a loser.
They might be using similar narratives that fictional writers are, at least like on a maybe.
I think Kino Casino and TRS are very jealous of this Nick Fuentes, Kanye West. Yeah, it's an incredible spectacle. Yeah, as someone who doesn't pick a side, it's fantastic. Yeah, it's great human drama. And Nick Fuentes and Milo Yiannopoulos and Kanye West and Donald Trump are great at producing human spectacles. Right? You just can't take your eyes away from what Kanye, Nick, Trump, people like Milo Yiannopoulos. All right, it's just a train wreck quality to their lives. It's life as a performance art.
A higher level, if we think about them in this higher level comparison. But for them, it's really about using those narratives to convince you that they can provide a service that other people cannot.
Yeah,
And I think that brings us to your first topic, which we can also go into.
yeah. So I do want to get. I want to follow up with something that you.
Yeah, we all hope Milo Yiannopoulos is not sexually objectifying Kanye West. Like, let this be a meeting of minds and not of bodies. All right, we wish for this to be a spiritual, transcendent, Christian type of relationship here. I hope they don't give in to their carnal bodily urges. Yeah, that's right. Milo is on record of being a lecher with black men, specifically military guys. God forbid. God forbid.
Kind of restart because in your paper you're talking about like shamanism as one of the potential first professions to emerge in societies and cross-culturally recurrent profession, and I can imagine there's some.
Yeah, so perhaps a prostitute is the oldest profession, but shaman, or the person who gives assurance in a confusing, difficult world. Maybe the shaman is the preacher, the religious leader, the person who gives us a sense that all is going to be right with the world. And perhaps that's the oldest profession. But there's so many telling similarities here between the shaman, the YouTuber, the pundit, the clergyman, the influencer.
Well, actually, I don't. This is probably a question for you. So I can imagine some more progressive, liberal-minded people somewhat reactive to the notion of seeing shamans as a profession and creating narratives about their powers and that kind of stuff, because there's a somewhat of an implication of potentially exploitative or at least.
Yeah, there's no profession that can never be exploitative. God forbid, and the space cowboy. I don't get the comment about the space cowboy, glib medley. But there's no profession that is exempt from being exploitative, and certainly shamans and religious leaders, YouTubers and influencers are highly capable of being exploitative. But I didn't see all these parallels before. I understood that the radio host, the YouTuber, the pundit was primarily to tell people what they wanted to hear and give them a sense of assurance. That was a So I Married an Axe Murderer reference. Okay, don't know that movie or TV show.
Deceitful approach to things. But on the other hand, I know from anthropology that shamans very much regard what they're doing, yes, as a calling, but also as that's their profession and that's what they do. So I'm wondering, your article, I know for evolutionary anthropologists or that kind of thing, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to discuss shamanism as a profession. But do you get pushback from like putting a potentially Western modern frame?
Mike Myers. I just don't find him very funny. Right, just not my cup of tea. I'm more of a Monty Python type of bloke.
On a practice which it doesn't fit well onto, and relatedly, how do the people in the communities react? Are they aware of your kind of theory around shamanism, and how do they react to that?
Okay, that's a great question. There's a lot there, so I'll start to address whatever I remember, and then we can dig in.
So listening to this discussion, it reminds me of an observation that if you feel like you understand your religion, you're not religious, right? That if you are, authentically religious or spiritual person, you're participating in a mystery, something that is way beyond your ken. Mike Myers, he's Canadian but mostly loved by Americans. It just seems like fairly lowbrow humor. But this theory of shamanism, right? Just like theories of religion, right? If you feel like you understand your religion, you feel like you understand type of spirituality that you subscribe to, or you feel like you know understand that the shaman, you have stepped outside. You've stepped outside the realm of religion or of the shaman, right? When you critically analyze things, it makes it verging on the impossible to enjoy them in the same way.
Yeah. So it was actually being in Mentawai that really highlighted for me the extent to which shamanism is centered around a service. And it's a bit complicated because on the one hand, shamans are, so in Mentawai they're known as sikere, and they are regarded as special, powerful humans, and they're charismatic, and they provide a center to social, spiritual, political life. On the other hand, it's quite clear to many people that it's a service because you're
Shamanism and medicine have a similar ritual aspect. Yeah, if you're going to the doctor for assurance, or because you feel lonely or confused, or there's something going on with you and you can't quite put your finger on it. Yeah, there's an emotional comfort element, the bedside manner to medicine. Medicine contains scientific elements, just like psychology contains scientific elements. Door-to-door sales contains scientific elements, but medicine is not a science. It contains elements of science. Yeah, the white coat. Yeah, that's a good point. The bedside manner. All the different things. Like when they tap on your back and they listen to your lungs, right? It just has absolutely nothing to do with your health. It's just people feel better when the doctor touches them and performs certain procedures, even though these particular procedures, which are about the most common things in the world, that tapping your knee, getting a response, right? None of these have any efficacy except an emotional, psychological efficacy of making people feel like they're being cared for.
You're sick, you have to choose among these sikere. They have to, you're evaluating different ones. There's constant talk about who's, to what is his trans fake? Does he really know the songs? Like, is he truly a sikere? Is he just a sikere because, his dad was able to, whatever, pay them?
And is it always a he, by the way, in those communities?
Yeah, it's slightly complicated. So the word sikere refers to both individuals in a couple. So the couple is usually male and female. Or actually, every example I know is male and female. But it is the man who is called to. So a simple answer to your question is yes, it's a he. But it's a bit more complicated because both of them are known as sikere. They heal in something called papete, healing ceremonies. And in the healings,
MDMA was used by therapists for a couple of decades before it got banned. Yeah, if the doctor or the therapist or the psychiatrist is able to give the patient, a substance, there's going to be, frequently a positive effect, right? The placebo effect. Right, even if there is no inherent value in the substance. So I'm all down with the placebo effect. It wouldn't bother me if any of the supplements I take only have a placebo effect. I'm happy to benefit from the placebo effect. The world is such a big buzzing confusion and so challenging that if there's something that brings comfort, I'm totally down with it. Right? The things that bring me comfort and that work for me and buoy me up, they don't have to always make rational sense. In fact, they're often much more comforting and effective if they are completely outside the realm of the rational.
healing ceremonies, it's almost always the male who is called. I actually, in my data set of 40-something ceremonies, don't have a single one in which a female is called, although I spoke to a doctor who's been in Mentawai for a long time, and she has said that she has seen or heard of females being called, so I don't want to say that females are never called.
These are like female deities or spirits that are...
No, sorry, the female in the couple. Like a woman sikere, a woman shaman.
I was thinking symbolically like a male and female, but you mean actual couples.
Yeah, so I'll give you a simple version, and then if we want to, we can go into the complex version. A simple version is, in Mentawai, overwhelmingly, men are shaman and men are called.
So how often do you read Z-Man? I'm just curious how often people dip into him, how much of a common audience we might have. It's been about 4 years since I've paid much attention to him because I just couldn't deal with the assertion upon assertion upon assertion style that he has, turning out his daily column. But I used to get asked back in the day, what do you think about Z-Man's latest column? Very compelling, where it makes the argument that there's this shadowy conspiracy that's running things.
called to heal in healing ceremonies. Male shamans are believed to have the power to see spirits, and they provide these services. The more complicated thing is that when a shaman is initiated, both he and his wife have to observe particular taboos. Both he and his wife come to be known as Sikere, and
Yeah, it's like my dad, the Seventh-day Adventist preacher. He would never go inside a movie theater because when we were Seventh-day Adventists don't go to theaters. So even after he left the church, he still wanted to maintain, that level of purity. And Orthodox rabbis that I hang out with back in the days when there were blockbusters, they wouldn't step inside a blockbuster, in case that was misinterpreted as they were going to see something salacious, even though Blockbuster obviously didn't rent pornography. So, yeah, to be a shaman or to be a religious spiritual hero or an influencer or a particular type of YouTuber, like there are all sorts of normal human endeavors and activities and frailties that you just can't participate in. Yeah, apparently Z-Man's on Taki's mag. I haven't seen that. I haven't read that. So Colin Liddell reported.
there are a couple of these wives I know of who are also regarded as having these special powers. And although I have never seen them called in one of these babete, one of these kind of all-day healing ceremonies, I have heard that these women are sometimes called in like more private healing.
I used to like Gregory Hood. Yeah, I interviewed Z-Man. He was on my show, and it was fine. And I used to enjoy some Gregory Hood, but much of the distant right has just become too conspiratorial, too much of a, I don't know, isolation in a silo. It's like, people in polite society usually encourage, not to talk about, racial differences, but then people get red-pilled, and then that's, all they can talk about. And so I remember when I interviewed F. Roger Devlin, he said that the only news sources he consulted were the websites he wrote for, VDare, American Renaissance, Countercurrents, websites like that. And so I noticed with a lot of the most prolific members of the distant right, they only read sources from, within the group. And that makes them, to me, boring, not terribly effective. I want someone who's grappling with all sorts of different perspectives. Yeah, he calls Baltimore Lagos. That's his in-group joke about Baltimore.
Healing contexts. So, yeah.
I'm sorry for sidetracking you, but that was a very clear explanation. And I'll remind you as well that you were explaining about the reaction to your framework and stuff. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of a complicated thing because in Mentoe, people recognize that Sikere are competing and that you choose them on the basis of who seems the best. But there's a double narrative where you never want to signal that. So sometimes I'll talk to someone and I'll be like, why did...
So YouTubers are like rival gangs, right? They go, raid each other's territories. There's definitely a gang-like social dynamic to the followers of various YouTubers.
Why did you choose these Sikere to come and heal you? And they'll say, oh, they were nearby, or they're my wife's relatives. But of course, the wife has many relatives in this area. There are many Sikere nearby. And then when I've talked to other people, it's like, yes, we want to talk like that because if we get sick and other Sikere are not available, we don't want to give the impression that we prefer some over others, or that we think that some are good and others are not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you are ranking them and comparing them in your mind, but you don't want to do that verbally because you don't want people to feel like you undervalue them or maybe publicly offend them.
Yeah. So I imagine there are concepts of honor or equivalents to honor in play, like fiat.
Yeah, it's not necessarily honor so for instance.
And yeah, there's a funny relationship between a YouTuber and his audience. Like some, YouTubers only want praise, and then if they ever get criticism from someone, then they're in their bad books. And then there are the people who just come on with the sociopaths who just come on with excessive praise, and then they just absolutely flip on you, and they become just a torrent of hatred. So all sorts of interesting dynamics between the YouTuber and his audience.
For instance, I was recently reading this photography of Egyptian Bedouin society, or maybe Libyan Bedouins, and where honor, I think, looks very, very different. In Mentoe, it's more like general reputation, It feels different from like a very honor-based society.
So just politeness, like kind of the social norm. You shouldn't denigrate people.
Yeah, it's more like politeness.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's a recognition that people, it is a profession, or different options and so on. Then
Right, if you pray in the same synagogue, you take certain Torah classes, and then you switch out, right, it's a really dramatic, it can be a really dramatic development. Like, it feels like a betrayal when you stop, taking courses from one rabbi and switch to a different rabbi, or switch to a different synagogue, switch to a different prayer minyan. I found it much more wrenching than I expected. Like, the kind of bonds that I felt myself, building up in Orthodox Judaism, and my great reluctance to threaten those bonds, to disrupt those bonds, right? Just the emotional intensity of Orthodox Judaism, the power of the community over me, the power of forming a bond with a rabbi, the loss of freedom that would come with forming bonds with a community, with people, with a rabbi, the kind of ironclad nature of the commitment that would just, wrap you up like these invisible cords of connection and commitment. It just kind of snuck up on me in